What is going on, YouTube? Gabmus here, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Tech Pills weekly livestream. So, let's get straight to the news for this week. The first item is about a new feature coming to, well, GNOME in a way, but not necessarily only to GNOME. I'm talking about GNOME, or, well, G Memory Monitor. Now, this is a new project started by the GNOME team that basically will allow apps to be aware of when the system is low on memory. This is a new API that's written on top of a dbus interface. It's very small, as small as 500 lines of C code, which is pretty impressive. And what it does is it basically listens to a low memory event on kernels 5.2 and higher and sends a signal to listening applications via dbus to ask them to free up some memory. And this way, apps that probably support that can voluntarily free up some memory, and so that the system will keep running normally. And this is a very interesting idea, in my opinion. As far as I know, it's a pretty new concept to actually ask apps to free memory, and it's surely a great idea, and will make I'm pretty sure it will make a big difference in the future of Linux desktop, and in particular with devices like with low power devices like the new Linux phones that are coming out, and other low power machines like the Raspberry Pi or other single board computers. Let's move on to the next point. This is more of a public service announcement, if you want. It's about gaming on Intel GPUs. I mean, if you're gaming on an Intel GPU, I don't know what you're doing. Maybe you're just casually playing some games, like maybe some esports titles or whatnot. But if you are, and you're savvy enough, you're probably using the performance governor. Now, a governor is basically it's an instruction to the CPU that it asks it, that sets it on a different power mode. So on Intel CPUs, there are two power modes, two governors. One is called power save, and the other is performance. And of course, I mean, in general, if you want a game, you probably want to set your governor on performance. But apparently, that's not helping if you're gaming on an Intel GPU, so an integrated Intel GPU. This was discovered by Jason Ekstrand, from the Intel open source Linux graphics drivers team. And apparently, if you use the power save governor, like the one that you're logically not supposed to be using, you're getting 25 to 30% better performance. And at first you just, I don't know, at the time I read this article, I didn't know what to think of it. I thought it was maybe a bug or something, but apparently it probably has to do with power consumption, since usually, I mean, modern CPUs, even like Ultrabook ones, are pretty powerful by themselves. So, I mean, yeah, if you're using a CPU bound software, I don't know, if you're compiling stuff or if you're rendering a video using your CPU, you're probably better off still using the performance governor. But apparently, if you're gaming, if you're using the power save governor, this leaves more power to the integrated GPU. So by forcing the CPU to use less power, you're increasing the power availability for the GPU and consequentially increasing performance. So again, more of a public service announcement. If you're gaming on an Intel GPU, use the power save governor. And if you're using Feral game mode, apparently soon, probably there will be, I mean, the power save option will be default for Intel GPUs, since Jason Extran actually proposed this change in the game mode code. And let's move to the next topic. Zwei developer Drew DeWalt got his new phone. It's a Pine phone. And his reaction here is, well, I cannot actually say that because otherwise YouTube will demonetize me, but it's wholly blank. Let's just say that. So I actually read his blog post. It's very interesting. He goes, well, into decent detail about his first experience with the Pine phone, and he says that he's excited with the potential of the completely open source friendly hardware that Pine phone ships, and he's happy to see that the kernel is all open source. Even if it's not 100% upstream, it will be soon, since apparently the Pine 64 team is working on upstreaming the still open source changes to the upstream kernel. And perhaps one of the more interesting things is that he's working on a new mobile shell based on Zwei. Now, first off, if you don't know what Zwei is, it's basically a clone of the i3 window manager button Wayland. And if you don't know what the i3 window manager is, have you been living under a rock? Anyway, it's basically an alternative to a desktop environment. You can either use on Linux or, I mean, other operating systems like BSD. You can either use a normal desktop environment like GNOME, XFC, KDE, or what have you, but you can also use a window manager. And there are many popular window managers out there. Mostly power users tend to like them because they can just control everything with the keyboard, and that's something that actually pretty compelling. And actually I've tried Zwei a couple of times. I actually have it installed in my system right now, and it's a pretty good window manager. I mean, once you get around the configuration, which is not too complicated, it's pretty interesting. Anyway, my point here is that if you think about it, a tiling window manager makes a lot of sense on a phone form factor, because you usually don't want to have stacked windows on top of each other. You're probably going to have an app switcher or something like that, of course, because you will need to be able to actually move through your open apps. But apart from that, you don't really need stacking window management like the classic window management, like you move windows on top of each other and so on and so forth. And actually using a tiling paradigm makes a lot of sense, because if you think about it, even on Android, you have the possibility to well, basically tile to applications one next to the other. And so on using Sway, which is styling by default, but can also just focus on one application, and it has all of the other nice things about any Linux desktop, like workspaces and stuff like that. It actually looks very interesting. And what he's done up to this point, he's made a new app drawer. So it's actually very simple. You just swipe up from the bottom of the screen and it just opens a very Android style app grid, and you can just launch apps from there. It's I'm pretty sure it's still in concept stage of development, but it's very nice and interesting that we're seeing more and more development towards Linux phones, which is very exciting. Other nice things that he points out is that he actually, as far as the actual phone goes, he actually tried calling and SMS, and they're both working and without proprietary blobs, albeit still in the command line. Apparently, I don't know what distribution he tried, possibly Postmarket OS. I think that's one of the more advanced ones up to this point. But anyway, he tried calling and SMS and they worked, but he had to write lengthy terminal commands to do that. And while it's impressive that it works without any proprietary blobs, it's still, well, not 100% user ready. I mean, it's not great to open a terminal to place a phone call, although it would be kind of neat. I don't know, just I don't know, to show off your power level. You know, you're at the bar or something with your friends and you just have to make a call and you just open up your terminal and write esoteric commands. I don't know, it's kind of cool. But anyway, of course, these are things that are an easy fix. Once you can do something in the terminal, it's pretty easy, if not trivial, to write a GUI application on top of the terminal commands. Anyway, let's get to the chat. I see some activity. The Layman Linux says, hello all, hi there. What was the manager? I was letting my dogs out. I was talking about the i3 window manager and Sway, just to explain what a tiling window manager is. Happier here though. And Razor says, JWN suits me fine. I just assume this is a tiling window manager. I've never heard about it actually. I know BSP WM, Herbst Luft WM, and Awesome WM, and DWM. I actually know quite a lot, but never heard of JWM. Pretty sure it's fine. The Lame Linux again says, the only window manager I used and comfortable with, that's OpenBox. Yeah, I mean, OpenBox is, well, it's a window manager, alright, but it's not actually like a, well, it's a traditional window manager. And with traditional, I mean stacking. Just like any other window manager in any major desktop environment, OpenBox just gives you, well, it's a window manager in the most pure way you can define a window manager. It manages your windows. It also gives you a pretty decent, actually, right-click menu to go through your installed apps and stuff like that. I actually kind of like OpenBox myself. I don't really use it. I've not ever really used it like as my primary window manager or anything. I have done it with Sway and it's been pretty good. But with OpenBox, I know you can do it. I've seen people do it with, like, you have to basically use different modules for everything. Like, you have to use a different module for setting your wallpaper, and for if you want to have a panel, you have to use a separate application to do that and stuff like that. Well, most window managers, to be fair, do that, but Sway at least has the bar on top, which is already integrated. I think it's okay, wait, maybe it's not integrated, it's Sway bar. I'm pretty sure it's part of this Sway project, but not necessarily included with Sway. I don't know. Anyway, it's I digress. But yeah, OpenBox is a pretty nice window manager. If you want something extremely lightweight, like extremely lightweight, OpenBox is probably a decent choice. Anyway, let's move on to the next topic, and we're talking about window managers. Okay, now we're talking about regular desktop environments again, and the news is that Alpine, the Alpine Linux distro, added initial GNOME and KDE support. Okay, I don't know if you're familiar with Alpine. It's basically a very minimal and lightweight Linux distribution. It's one of the few, if not the only, Linux distribution to not use the GNU Core utils, except maybe for GCC, but I'm not 100% sure. I think that if you want to compile the Linux kernel, you still have to use GCC because LLVM doesn't work with that still. But anyway, the thing about Alpine is that it's really okay. That's its thing. It's small. That's most of it, and it's not even built on glibc. It's built on MUSL. Musel. I don't know how to pronounce that honestly. But anyway, up to this point, I've honestly seen Alpine as mostly a I don't know, embedded oriented distro. Many people actually use Alpine as the base for their containers, be them Docker or any other kind of container, and that actually makes a lot of sense since a very basic Alpine image can be as small as 8 megabytes, which is pretty impressive if you ask me. But apparently they added initial support for GNOME and KDE. So now this is from their release notes for version 3.11.0. And as far as I know, they aren't giving any much more information about it, but are they trying to get to the desktop market? Because that'd be very interesting. I don't know how much use would Alpine be in a desktop scenario. In a desktop, I mean, as a desktop operating system, because it's very bare bones, and the installation. Well, I don't know much about Alpine's installation, but I know that it's fairly similar to Arch in the sense that it gives you a bare bones system, and you can do whatever you want from there. And they have a pretty comprehensive wiki, and so you can just, I don't know, do your thing. But with a desktop environment, it means you will use desktop apps, and well, I mean, using something like Flatpak on top of that would be quite interesting. I mean, Flatpak app images open up a lot of possibilities for even something like Alpine to use mainstream apps because it's all packaged into one, I mean, very self-contained package. So either you wouldn't need dependencies, you wouldn't need to contaminate your install with GNU libraries, if you will. I don't know. It's a very interesting news. I will see where that goes probably in the next year. All right, and let's move on to the next news. And I don't know if you like Arena FPS games. Personally, I love them. I'm a big fan. I was a big fan of Open Arena, and Alien Arena and stuff like that. And another very nice open source free software Arena FPS just got released on Steam. You probably heard of it at some point. It's called Red Eclipse 2. And again, it's now on Steam, which is pretty impressive. It's great to see more open source games on Steam these days. It's great that they're able to do this. They're able to get more users, more players, and more visibility on the project. And I actually tried it, and it's a weird game, to be honest, because when I think arena FPS, I think Quake Arena, all right, and uh, I mean all the outshoots from that. But this is actually very different. It has some Unreal Tournament elements, like some parkour and very interesting new weapon mechanics. Weapons aren't very precise compared to what you probably used to with Quake, and you have recoil, and there are no many energy weapons. I mean, there's a shotgun, which is pretty okay. It's a shotgun, and it has an alternative fire mode, which fires a glowing ball of fire. I don't know. And there's an SMG, which has a lot of recoil, but if you can manage to fight the recoil, it's actually a very strong weapon. Then there's a sniper rifle. There's a sword which is actually pretty interesting. I'll get back to that later. And it has mines and grenades. That's just weird to me. And one other another interesting thing is that it doesn't, like, like in games like Quake and even a Real Tournament, you have basically no limit to your inventory. Like, you can carry as many weapons as you can find since you spawn, right? Actually, in this game, you have a limit. You can only carry like the default weapon, which is a just standard pistol, which you cannot drop. And then you can carry 2 other weapons and one one other item between grenades and mines. I didn't spend too much time on it, to be honest, but it's very, very interesting. It's definitely a different concept, a different take on the classic arena FPS genre. And while it's slower by default than games like Sonatic or even Quake Champions or definitely a Real Tournament, it gets pretty fast once you start exploiting the power slide mechanic. So you can jump or double jump, and the double jump is quite interesting because if you double jump without pressing any movement button, it just double jumps normally. But if you're moving like forward and you press the double jump button, it just propels you towards the direction. And then once you hit the ground, you can hold shift and do a power slide, which makes you even faster. And once you learn to exploit that, you can get pretty fast. And I found a very interesting game mechanic where you can just power slide around the whole map and just use the sword and go berserk on enemies. And it's a very fun game. It's free on Steam. It's open source, and just check it out. It's worth your time. The Layman Linux says in the chat, Steam has been great on helping out Linux and open source people. Sure, this is actually it would be worth another topic, honestly, because Steam has really done so much to the Linux gaming community, starting from releasing Steam on Linux in the first place, and then working on Proton and bringing tools like DXVK and now D9VK, which, by the way, I should have probably put this in the news, but as of recently, D9VK, which is okay, let's actually make this a full-fledged news point. All right, so if you don't know what DXVK is, it's a component in Proton which basically converts DirectX 10 and 11 to Vulkan. And it's actually very useful for most games. And if you've been using Proton in Steam or Steam Play to play Windows games on Linux, it's actually a game changer because the performance is just great and the implementation it works so well. It's incredible because actually the Wine team tried to implement DirectX 11 with OpenGL, and there's still, I mean, the Wine implementation is still there and it works to a certain extent, but it just can't compare with the XVK. The XVK is just so much better on every front. with performance, with stability, with feature completeness. It's just awesome. And from the XVK, actually another project started called D9VK, which actually tries to port to use the same base as the XVK to be able to convert DirectX 9 games to Vulkan. And while the DirectX 9 support in Wine through the OpenGL implementation works pretty well, it has some limitations. And the D9VK implementation is actually a lot better. And if you've tried it with supported games, you probably know that it's it's miles ahead of the Wine implementation. So very interesting news this week, I think. The 9VK got included into the XVK. So as of now, the XVK is a layer compatibility layer that brings support for DirectX 9, 10, and 11 to Linux, to Vulkan, which is, well, it's just awesome in my opinion. And the fact that the code base is unified, and that probably VKD3D, which is the other one that converts DirectX 12 to Vulkan, will probably be included as well. The fact that they are, I mean, the three of them, 9, 10, 11, and probably soonish the 12 implementation, will share all the same code base and will work towards a unified goal using the unified Vulkan API, which is just great. Again, it's another big game changer in the Linux gaming, in Linux gaming since, I don't know, OpenGL probably. It's just so good to see, and will probably bring so much innovation. And there are some instances already where the converter performance with these tools, mostly the XVK, is actually better than the native performance on Windows, which is just mind-blowing, because we all know that Linux is better, but converting a whole API to another API is no easy task, and it truly has some overhead. But again, in some cases it's better. The performance is actually better on the XVK. Just mind-boggling. Anyway, this point took a little bit more than I anticipated, but whatever. So if you're following the TechTales group on Telegram, you probably know that I've run a poll recently asking people what did they think about Emacs, and apparently most of the people think it's alright, which is just terrifying in my opinion. If you don't know, I'm a Vim user. But why did I bring it up in the first place? Well, there's actually a reason, and I will show you now. I've kind of started using Emacs, maybe. And okay, so if you're interested in what I'm doing, this is probably a shocker to you, but I've started giving Emacs a serious try. And so far I've been hating it. I just hate it so much, but at the same time, I actually think it's worth exploring. Now, if you don't know anything about the whole, I don't know, Vim versus Emacs situation, you probably don't know what I'm talking about here. But the thing is, Emacs as well as Vim, let me actually open something here. Let me show you. Oh, I had caps lock enabled, that's why this thing wasn't working. Okay, so if you don't know anything about text editors in Linux and in the open source community in general, really in the development community, there are these two big text editors historically, which are Vim and, well, historically it's VI, then replaced later by Vim, and Emacs. Both started in the 70s, I think, and they're just two very nice text editors. In particular, Vim introduced visual text editing to a command line interface, and Emacs tries to do the same thing, but in a kind of a different way. The two projects basically grow in very different directions, one from each other. I'm pretty sure that there haven't been communications between the two projects in the initial stages, but the thing is that Emacs is more like a Lisp environment that happens to be able to process text, and if you can process text, you can edit files, and so it's a text editor. I mean, while Vim or VI is, well, just a text editor. Vim grew actually to include support for plugins and Vim script, and it started getting extensible and stuff like that. While Emacs, as far as I know, always supported that, since actually even the text editing portion of Emacs is just a module, a Lisp module on top of, I mean, the Emacs Lisp core. So on one hand, you have Vim, which is minimal, simplistic, and very easy to, to understand, to learn. And on the other hand, you have Emacs, which is very feature complete. It's got lots of features, lots of extensibility, and it actually has a proper user interface. This is not a terminal. Even if it may look like one, this is not a terminal. This is the proper Emacs GUI. And of course, this is a configuration that I found on the internet. This is called Doom Emacs, which is a configuration that's more tailored towards Vim users. And in fact, it uses the Vim key bindings via a module called Evil Mode, which is pretty funny. And Evil Mode basically means Emacs VI layer. And let's actually get back to me here. And well, the thing about the war between these two text editors is that people, particularly programmers, like their tools. And since many people like Vim and many people like Emacs, but the two are very different from each other, there's this at this point it's more of a joke, really, because it's not really seriously a war, so to speak, but it's more like it's more of an inside joke between programmers and people who like text editors. And I've never thought I would have tried Emacs since I actually started casually looking at it and seeing all of the feature that it has, like org mode, which is well, it's basically an editor mode that integrates to-dos and agendas and calendars and all that kind of stuff into your text editor, and other stuff like extensible modes, like you can have markdown previews inside of Emacs because it actually supports graphics because it's not a terminal. And there's actually lots of stuff that Emacs has that Vim doesn't. And while Vim is still very actively developed, and there's even a fork of Vim called NeoVim, which is actually pretty great, that includes support for more languages to actually extend Vim, and actually includes some API for showing some graphics, and you can actually download some front ends for NeoVim, like and NeoVim Qt that offers some interesting features on top of NeoVim. It's not as complete, it's more like hacked on top of Vim. While Emacs, Emacs was like this from the beginning. So I'm kind of trying to get acquainted to it and start learning it and start seeing if I can make it my editor of choice. At this point, I still don't know. I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm using it more like a Vim emulator of sorts, and there are still some things that I don't know really how to do, so I'm still learning it. But I just thought I would bring this up. If you're interested, maybe look at my .files repo. It's actually, let me write into the chat. My .files repo is on GitLab. There you go. So you can just look at that, and inside of that, there's a folder called doom.d, that includes my Doom configuration. You can just look at Doom Emacs to try the actual. Well, you need to install that before using my config. So there's that. Anyway, let's get back to the chat and see what people are talking about. Razer 1981 says, why would I use this over, say, Mousepad, which is, if I remember correctly, it's the text editor from XFCE. Always done text editing in standard editors. So, okay, standard editors, they work. There's nothing inherently wrong with them, and even from time to time I find myself using gedit to write, I don't know, a note or something, or I just have to write something real quick and I just open up gedit. It just works. But the thing about I can personally speak about Vim, but most of the same things apply to Emacs, even if the actual usage is very different. The thing about Vim is that it's very keyboard focused and keyboard oriented, and it has lots of very advanced features, like navigation is very advanced. You can just go to a certain line just by pressing the line number and then the capital G, for instance, or you can delete whole words, or do search and replaces using regular expressions. And this is just like scratching the surface really of what Vim is capable of, because you can do also like things like macros. So you can just record a macro sequence and then run that over and over again in the same text or in a different file. Like, for instance, if I want to do multi-line editing with some conditions, I can do that with macros, and that's just a very nice feature. It's difficult to explain actually why I and many other people prefer to use Vim to a standard, say, text editor, but it's mostly to do with the speed at which you can do things once you get acquainted to it, once you get to learn how to use it. It has a pretty steep learning curve, and that's most of the reason why many people don't like it too much. But once you get past the initial phase of the learning curve, you start realizing the incredible power that these editors have. And I don't know, if you the current person that writes a lot of code, or even just text, to be honest. I even wrote most of my presentations these days, even the one for my thesis, for my bachelor thesis. I wrote it in Markdown and Vim. Well, actually, Markdown, part LaTeX, part HTML, part all of that inside of Vim. And it's really a do-it-all tool once you start to learn how to use it. If you have some spare time, I really suggest you try to use it. I wouldn't suggest you start with Emacs, because, to be honest, Emacs is not... It's weird, because Vim is considered to be unintuitive for most people. But again, once you get acquainted to it, there are just a couple of commands you need to know to actually be able to properly use Vim. And the same thing doesn't apply to Emacs. I mean, yeah, you can use Emacs in a kind of more relaxed way, but I don't think it's as simple, because it's a whole... It's like, there's this joke that Emacs is a nice operating system, it just lacks a good text editor. And this joke isn't actually that far from the truth, in the sense that Emacs being a full Lisp environment, it's more comparable to an operating system than it is to a text editor. But anyway, if you want to try Vim out, you can just open the terminal. I think there's a thing called Vim Tutor. Let me actually try that. Let's make this bigger. I have to alias Vim, because my Vim by default opens new Vim. But anyway, this is Vim, okay? I can just press colon and then I think Vim tutor. Nope, and then that's in here. Yeah, you just have to write Vim tutor. I'm pretty sure this is part of Vim itself. And it's just a very simple, easy, decently easy to follow tutorial that tells you the basics of Vim, and it's divided in lessons, so you can just pick one lesson up from time to time and just start learning it. If you want my opinion on it, I think it's really worth the effort, because if you're something that writes lots of text or lots of code, you're probably gonna be thankful of learning it. Anyway, this segment took far too longer than I wanted. And in this next segment, I just wanted to talk about this past year, 2019, and kind of make a recap of the more interesting things that happened this year, and just as a retrospective into okay. I just want to talk about this past year and see where we are right now, to better guess where we're going in the next year. So, in no particular order, in 2019 we saw the release of Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, and it's just, honestly, it's RHEL. It's not very much new by itself, but it's the first release under the new IBM leadership, which is, well, it's a milestone. It's something worth remembering in the future. It added support for ARM64 and IBM Power, which is very interesting. ARM64 is just the ARM architecture, and if you don't know what IBM Power is, it's another very interesting, actually very I would love to play with that, with the Power system. It's the successor to PowerPC. It's a whole different architecture. It's very interesting, and these new CPUs that IBM is putting out are very impressive, but they're not x86, so they're not compatible with, I don't know, Steam or your typical software, but they are still very much compatible with Linux. And you can run many things. They're mostly, I think, targeted towards big servers and workstations, and I would really love to be able to play around with an IBM Power CPU. And there's also this new thing called AppStreams, which allows Red Hat users to install specific versions of some packages and freeze to them, so they don't have like compatibility problems or any of that sort of stuff when upgrading the system, which is a pretty nice addition, considering that RHEL is mostly used in very sensitive and critical environments. And the biggest thing, in my opinion at least, is the deprecation or the replacement of Docker in favor of Podman, Buildah, and Skopeo. What are we talking about here? If you don't know what Docker is a container platform, and it basically allows you to run, well, containers in your Linux operating system. The thing about containers is that they're very much like virtual machines, but a lot lighter and a lot faster to spin up, to shut down, to generate, to create, it's just virtual machines, but better. And in the recent years, containers have seen lots of use, particularly in server deployments and testing, very much in testing and in development. And I personally use some Docker containers myself, and while I'm not too familiar with the technology, I know how to use it and I know its limitations. And Red Hat decided to replace Docker with this new family of tools, Podman, Buildah, and Skopeo. These tools are actually, well, the thing is, they replace Docker mostly one-to-one. They're almost completely compatible with Docker in most ways, but do things in a better, more, I would want to say, more standard, more elegant way. First off, Docker requires a daemon to run, which is problematic considering this daemon has super user privileges, and it's a process that's always running in the background in a system, and if it's vulnerable and it can be exploited, and then things get kind of messy. But Podman containers don't require any daemon to run and can run as unprivileged containers, which is a very interesting feature. I actually had a chance to play around with Podman recently, and I can tell you it's impressive how effortless it is to use when you know Docker, because you just have to use Docker commands, but just instead of writing Docker, you can just write Podman, and you can do something like alias Docker equals Podman, and it just works, which is pretty impressive. And I think this is a very good decision on Red Hat's part, and hopefully we'll see more adoption of these packages instead of Docker, which is really, honestly, at this point, I think it's better off if Docker starts, I don't know, collaborating with Podman. The next thing that happened this year that's very much noteworthy is that the Antergos development ended, and I made a video earlier this year talking about that, and honestly, it was pretty sad for me, because Antergos was the distro that made me discover Arch Linux, and if I'm using Arch Linux right now, it's probably because of Antergos. But I mean, it was an understandable choice. Again, this is the fate of open source projects. They come and go. It's not a big deal as long as they're actually open source and the community can pick them up. And that's mostly what happened here with EndeavourOS. EndeavourOS picked up the Antergos legacy, and they're trying to rebuild what Antergos was from scratch. They're not, as far as I know, they're not using much of the old tooling from Antergos, which is okay. I mean, it's not like the old tooling was that good. I mean, the distribution was pretty good itself, but it had some rough edges, and I think that starting fresh from scratch has it does make sense. And while EndeavourOS is still far from perfect, I've done a review recently of it in my channel. If you want, you can check it out. But EndeavourOS is not really ready, in my opinion, to be what Antergos was, but they're getting there. I can see that they're passionate people, that they're trying to actually create a valuable product here, and I hope they can manage to, and I hope to see the project get better, and hopefully at some point you will see a review on TechPills talking about EndeavourOS and praising it as the best distro ever made. And still staying into the Arch family, Manjaro actually formed a company this year in 2019, which is pretty impressive. Now, if you know me, I don't like Manjaro. I just don't like it. I don't like the way they do things. I don't like the way they manage packages and the things that differentiate them from Arch. But I can still respect it as a distribution, and respect its users for the choice, and respect the community for the great work that they're doing, because objectively speaking, it's a great distro. It's just that I don't like it. But anyway, I digress. I'm really happy. I was really happy to see Manjaro actually form an actual company, and this is a huge step forward for the project. And it really still feels a lot more like, I mean, Manjaro is always felt, and this feeling keeps getting stronger. Always felt like what Ubuntu is to Debian. And if you think about how popular and how much use Ubuntu has these days, I think they're going in the right direction, possibly. For the kind of market they want to reach. I just hope they will do very well in the next year, and Hopefully they will solve most of the issues that I have with the distribution. They will try to get back to the KISS principle a little bit more. And with KISS, I mean, keep it simple, but not keep it so minimal that it's unusable, like, well, most of Arch is, for new users at least. The thing about Manjaro is that they're trying to pull an Ubuntu out of Arch. And that's not really something that I appreciate to see, mostly because this would bring the same problems that Ubuntu has. If you try to hide the complexity of a system too much, you end up with a more complex system. And I think they should they should take a step back and start making their system less complex. But anyway, that's beyond the point. They formed a company. I'm really happy for them, and I hope they will do great in the next year. The Lemon Linux says, slowly closing my Manjaro laptop lid. Again, it's no shame. Don't feel ashamed to use Manjaro. You can use, as long as it's Linux, you can use whatever you want. You can even use Ubuntu. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Ubuntu. There's nothing wrong with most Linux distros. And really, at this point, distros don't matter too much. It's just Manjaro in particular. It's like with Emacs. I hate Emacs because it has great features, but I don't like the way that they're doing things. Exactly the same thing with Manjaro. I don't hate Manjaro though. The thing is that Manjaro, they have some pretty great ideas. They're doing some pretty awesome things, but in my opinion, they're trying too hard to be Ubuntu when they really shouldn't. They should still keep their complexity as low as possible and make some of the system stuff more simple, more closer to what Arch is doing. Anyway, let's move on with the 2019 recap. And the next point is what AMD has done this year. It's just incredible. So AMD this year released the 3rd generation of Ryzen CPUs based on the Zen 2 architecture. Now, this year, Intel got absolutely destroyed by AMD. At this point, if you want to buy a CPU in any price range for any use, there's no reason to go for Intel because they're more expensive, and even if in some very edge cases there's a little bit more performance on the Intel side, the price difference just doesn't justify it. And it's really okay. So let's actually try to make this more organized than just my stream of consciousness. The whole new 3rd generation Ryzen lineup, starting from the Ryzen 5 up to the Ryzen 9, that actually competes in the HEDT platform, the high-end desktop platform, is just so if you want to go mainstream CPU, you have the whole price range of choices. You can go with whatever you want, and you're gonna be absolutely great. And if you want to go even higher than that, the new Threadrippers are just mind-boggling, just so powerful. They have they've been able to reach great clock speeds and a huge amount of cores, and I don't know how they pulled this off, but they did, and the performance is just great. And if you need a mainstream desktop PC, you can go with either Ryzen 5, 7, or 9, and you be golden for the time to come. But if you want to build a workstation, like a very powerful, I don't know, video editing, or if you're working on very big projects, very big programming projects, you need to compile lots of things. If you're working on the Linux kernel, you need to be able to compile the Linux kernel in under 1 minute or something. You can build a very powerful Threadripper 3rd generation system, and it will just blow away anything Intel has to offer as of right now. And the sad thing is that Intel is trying to catch up in a very unimpressive way. They keep releasing the same products over and over again, and they're still stuck in their 14 nanometer process with some wonky and mostly unseen 10 nanometer lineup in their laptop range, which is really unimpressive. And on top of that, this Intel trying to catch up with AMD caused the shortages of Intel CPUs that we're seeing right now. So many, if you want to buy an Intel CPU, maybe if you want to buy like a CPU for yourself, maybe you can find one, but the prices are hugely inflated because of low availability. And the biggest concern is that system integrators are having the hardest time actually trying to catch up with the Intel shortages, because they need to release new products and Intel doesn't have any CPUs for them. And that's why we've been seeing many of the popular brands, even in laptops, starting to move to AMD solutions to try and differentiate and try to get around the Intel shortages. And besides, it makes sense because it's an overall better platform as of right now. And if you put on top of that all of the security vulnerabilities and the speculative execution vulnerabilities that we've been seeing on the Intel platform in the last years actually, it's not a nice situation to be in for Intel. But anyway, we'll see in 2020 where they will go. Still talking about AMD, they have been able to finally release a GPU family that probably competes with Nvidia in both price and performance. And particularly for Linux gamers like myself, the new lineup of the 5700, 5700 XT and the newly released 5500 XT is just awesome to see, because they are actually priced very competitively with the Nvidia options, and in particular if you're running Linux, they offer great support on Linux, and because of the fact that the drivers are open source and built into the kernel, which is the greatest thing that a hardware company has ever done, probably, to make Linux support, but to make Linux support better. To be fair, Intel GPU drivers are also open source into the kernel, but it's not like Intel GPUs are worthwhile anyway. Another big news, speaking of the Linux kernel, is that WireGuard will probably land in Linux 5.6, and this has been a huge year for WireGuard, and they try to land into the upstream kernel for they try to land in the upstream kernel for quite a while now, and for one reason or the other they still haven't managed to, but they will probably land in Linux 5.6, which is great to see. And if you don't know what WireGuard is, it's basically a new VPN technology, and that's the plan is to build that into the kernel, and it's something like 5,000 lines of code, which is incredible. Anyway, the code base, I'm not sure about the number, but the code base is incredibly small, which is honestly great, because a very sensitive piece of tech like a VPN needs to be audited and needs to be I mean, you need as many eyes on it as possible, and if the code base is small, it's less likely that there are bugs or security vulnerabilities. So that's just great. And while, I mean, WireGuard already works perfectly as a DKMS module as of right now, having it built into the kernel will be just a step more towards wider adoption. And maybe we'll see more mainstream adoption of WireGuard and possibly some more user-oriented solutions to use WireGuard as a all-purpose VPN. And the last point on this very fast 2019 recap is the Steam new library interface. Steam finally managed to get out of the 90s, and they did it with style. Some people hate the new Steam interface. I think it's great because it offers better navigation, better library management, and dynamic categories, which are just great. It's an old meme that people having more than a couple hundred games on Steam don't know what to play because they have so many games. It's difficult to actually find something you want to play in there. And with the new dynamic categories and the new just the new library overview of the titles with a nice cover art, it makes a big difference in my opinion. And it's a very appreciated change, and surely a noteworthy moment in time for 2019. Let's actually see what the chat's talking about. Jamerican347 says, have you used the new AMD Ryzen 3000 series CPU with Linux? No, I haven't, but I know of people that have, and they say they're just great. So Razer says, Peppermint on this laptop, Debian on main, but test out others too. Yeah, again, distributions don't really matter. You can really use whatever you prefer, whatever you feel more comfortable with. I use Ubuntu on my servers myself, so there's that. The Lame Linux says, I got a new college laptop and Arch-based distros work the best on it. Ubuntu-based does somewhat work as long as they got the 5.x kernel. I don't want to use Arch, since I don't have time to maintain it. That's a fair point. I mean, of course, Arch requires a little bit more maintenance and is a little bit more involved compared to other distributions, which is okay depending on what you're trying to get out of your computer, but it's fair to be able to say that you just don't want to use it because it's just not what you're looking for. And I guess Manjaro works well for you, just roll with it. Joe American says, I guess that's a yes on Ryzen 3000. Yeah. The Limit Linux, this semester I got a Linux class, thought about running Arch, so I say in class, by the way, I use Arch, okay. Well, I mean, don't you think that this meme is getting stale? This, by the way, use Arch meme? It's not like we're doing that. We Arch users are doing that, right? Are we? Okay, we're kind of doing that. Arch users are kind of like that, but it's not because it's Arch itself. I mean, any great piece of tech, if you like a tool that you use, you want other people to see how good it is for their own good. So you just spread the knowledge, you know. Archie Watch says, hey Gab, glad to see you back. Thank you, glad to see you made it for the stream. About Intel's plan to get back to at AMD, watch the video. Are we moving to modular PCs from Cortex? I actually haven't seen a Cortex video in a long time. I actually know the channel. He's a great guy. He actually manages to, of course, okay. Cortex has his voice is just half of why his videos are good, but he actually manages to explain the hardware market pretty well, and he actually seemed to be doing his research, which is very much appreciated, particularly in this day and age. Joe American says, have you set up WireGuard VPN in your personal setup? What does it take to set up and maintain? Is it available for iOS, Android? Oof. Okay, WireGuard VPN in my personal setup. I've tried it. I don't have a use for personal VPN as of right now, but I've played around with WireGuard myself, and it's well, it's as simple as setting up an SSH connection, if you're familiar with that. And what does it take to set up and maintain? I'm pretty sure it doesn't require any maintenance at all. And to set up, you just need to create an asymmetric key and add your key to the server, and it's very simple. And actually, let me give you a tutorial on WireGuard. There's this tutorial that Noah from Ask Noah and Destination Linux recorded a while ago, on how to set up WireGuard, and let me actually link it in the chat. It's a very simple, very straightforward, and well, that's most of what you need to set up to actually get started with WireGuard. It's very simple and doesn't require lots of effort. And as far as iOS/Android support, as far as I know, it's available on Android, but your kernel needs to support that. And most custom ROM kernels should support that, as far as I know. And then you need the user space tool that you can get from F-Droid, I think. Let me actually search for that real quick. WireGuard on F-Droid. Yep, you just need to download WireGuard from F-Droid, and if your kernel supports that, then you should be good to go. I don't know, I don't remember if it requires root access, but if it does, it's Android. But anyway, guys, this is gonna wrap it up for this episode. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, please make sure to press the thumbs up button down there, and also remember to join the Awesome Tech Pills community at techpills.technology/community, or using one of the QR codes that you see over here. Also, a couple of quick announcements. I won't be doing any videos or live streams up till January, well, up till the 2nd or 3rd week of January, because I'm getting back home and I just wanted to enjoy my holidays, and unfortunately I won't have either the time nor the equipment to make videos. So I'll be seeing you in January. And so Merry Christmas, guys, and Happy New Year, and I'll see you in 2020. Bye, guys.